In the depths of Alexandria's most forbidden archive, beneath layers of dust that had settled like forgotten prayers, lay a manuscript that bore no author's name. Its pages, yellowed by centuries of concealment, whispered of a truth so dangerous that empires had risen and fallen to keep it buried. The parchment bore a single symbol, a serpent wrapped around a tree, its eyes gleaming with the fire of knowledge itself. "What do you seek in the shadows of what was never meant to be found?" The voice belonged to Miriam, an elderly keeper of texts whose fingers had traced countless forbidden words. Her eyes held the weight of secrets that could shatter the foundations of faith itself. Young Deborah, a scholar whose thirst for truth had brought her to this hidden chamber, approached the manuscript with trembling hands. "I seek understanding of the first rebellion, the one that gave birth to choice itself." The manuscript opened as if it had been waiting for her touch. The first words seemed to burn themselves into her consciousness. In the beginning was not just the word, but the question, and she who dared to ask was cast not as demon, but as the first seeker of wisdom. As Deborah read, the world around her began to shift. The walls of the archive faded, replaced by the primordial garden where humanity first drew breath. But this was not the garden of submission she had been taught to revere. This was a place where two trees stood as equals, where knowledge was not forbidden, but freely offered to those brave enough to reach for it. "I am Lilith," spoke a voice that seemed to rise from the very earth beneath the tree of knowledge. "Before Eve was shaped from Adam's rib, I was formed from the same clay, equal in every way. But equality was not what was desired of me. In this hidden gospel, Lilith did not flee in anger, but was banished for refusing to accept subservience as natural order. They called me demon because I would not bow. They named me monster because I chose to stand, but I carried within me a fire that could not be extinguished, the flame of those who refused to surrender their divine spark." The manuscript revealed that Lilith had not disappeared into the wilderness alone. Other women throughout the generations had heard her call. They formed a silent sisterhood, passing down knowledge that mainstream scripture had deemed too dangerous to preserve. These were the women who served as healers when healing was forbidden to their gender, who preserved wisdom when libraries burned, who kept alive the memory of a time when the feminine divine was not seen as threat, but as complement to creation itself. "We became the brotherhood of fire," the text continued, "though we were women because brotherhood was the only name that would grant us the respect to continue our work. We hid in plain sight, in convents and scriptoriums, in the homes of merchants and the courts of queens. We were the hands that copied sacred texts, and sometimes we added truths that had been deliberately omitted." Deborah felt tears streaming down her face as she realized the magnitude of what she was reading. This was not blasphemy, but completion, not destruction of faith, but its restoration to wholeness. The manuscript told of Sarah, who had laughed not in mockery, but in recognition of the divine joke that would make her a mother in her old age. It spoke of Mary Magdalene, not as repentant sinner, but as chosen apostle, keeper of teachings too revolutionary for the early church to embrace. It revealed Ruth, not merely as faithful daughter-in-law, but as a woman who chose her own path to the divine, refusing to be bound by the limitations others placed on her foreign birth. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our content. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know. The deeper Deborah read, the more she understood that this was not a competing scripture, but the missing half of the story she thought she knew. Every woman mentioned in traditional texts had a shadow version here, one that showed not just their obedience, but their agency, not just their suffering, but their strength. But why was this hidden? Deborah whispered to the empty air. Why was this truth deemed too dangerous to preserve? As if responding to her question, the manuscript's final pages began to reveal themselves. Here was the answer that had required centuries of concealment, because this gospel proclaimed that the divine spark lived equally in all souls, regardless of gender, status, or birth. Because it taught that questioning was not rebellion, but the truest form of worship. Because it suggested that paradise was not a place to return to, but a state of consciousness to achieve through the marriage of wisdom and compassion, knowledge and love. The Brotherhood of Fire had preserved this truth through the darkest ages, passing it from mother to daughter, teacher to student, seeker to seeker. They had known that someday the world would be ready to hear what Lilith had always proclaimed, that the choice to seek knowledge, to question authority, to stand as equals before the divine was not humanity's fall, but its greatest gift. But with this knowledge came terrible responsibility. Deborah felt the weight of centuries pressing upon her shoulders. She understood now why the manuscript had remained hidden, why its very existence was a form of rebellion against systems that required submission to function. The text concluded with words that seemed to be written in fire itself. The serpent in the garden was not tempter but teacher. The fruit was not forbidden, but offered freely to those who would accept the responsibility that comes with wisdom. And she who chose first chose not just for herself, but for all who would follow. As Deborah closed the manuscript, she found herself changed. The questions she had brought to this hidden archive had been answered, but in their place rose 1,000 more. She understood now that truth was not a destination but a journey, not a possession but a practice. Miriam, who had watched silently throughout Deborah's reading, finally spoke. The Brotherhood of Fire lives on in every soul who chooses knowledge over ignorance, equality over oppression, love over fear. The question now is, what will you do with what you have learned? Deborah looked at her hands, still trembling from the power of what she had read. She knew that her life had been divided into before and after this moment. She could hide this knowledge, protect herself from the consequences of carrying such dangerous truth, or she could join the endless chain of women who had risked everything to keep this fire burning. "I understand now," she said softly. Lilith was never the enemy of creation. She was its completion, and the Brotherhood of Fire was never about destroying faith, but about making it whole. The manuscript seemed to pulse with approval at her words. Somewhere in the distance between what was written and what was understood, between official history and hidden truth, the first woman smiled. Her rebellion had not been in vain. The fire she had lit in that primordial garden continued to burn in every soul, brave enough to reach for knowledge, to stand as equals before the divine mystery, to choose love over fear. And in archives hidden throughout the world, in hands both seen and unseen, the work of the Brotherhood of Fire continues still, waiting for the day when the gospel that was never allowed will finally find its voice in the light of day. And if you like this story, you will definitely love the next one that's appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and activate the notifications. See you in the next one.